ny leder fra Senterpartiet. Det litt tradisjon, ikke nødvendigvis, men at den som leder nettverket representerer et av regjeringspartiene, og at nestleder fra et av opposisjonspartiene. Men jeg må jo bare si at i nettverket så vi veldig likestilte, som tar hør og bør i et sånt nettverk. Og det politisk, og det politisk uenighet, men man prøver å finne felles grunn, men ikke minst felles bakgrunn for å kunne danne egne meninger og utvikle ny politikk. Så sånn sett så dette nettverket veldig, veldig viktig. Dette her jo et seminar som skal følge opp de forpliktelsene som blant annet Norge ga under befolkningskonferansen som var i Nairobi for 2 år siden. Og jeg hadde gleden av å være til stede på det, som var veldig spennende, men det var jo også en oppfølgingskonferanse som egentlig da skulle markere at det var 25 år siden Kairo-konferansen, som var en befolkningskonferanse som for første gang, og dette synes jeg helt magisk, første gang da tenkte jeg at kanskje likestilling, kvinners rettigheter, rettigheter knyttet til SRHR, har noe med befolkning å gjøre. Det synes jeg ganske magisk, at de brukte da 7 konferanser på å komme fram til det. Men jeg gleder at de først gjorde det. Og det var jo konferanser, slik jeg forstod det, hvor det var veldig mye optimisme knyttet til utviklingen av rettigheter i da Kairo. 25 år etter, da jeg var der, så føltes det ikke sånn lenger. Man følte at man hadde gått mange skritt, men også så vi at noen land hadde tatt store skritt fremover, mens i andre land så vi tilbakeslag. Og det vel kanskje en av de situasjonene vi ser i Europa i dag, og det derfor disse spørsmålene dessverre aldri slutter å være dagsaktuelle, og det viktig å sette på dagsorden. Jeg hadde jo da også gleden av, nå så jeg der, Dag Ulstein som var der som Norges utviklingsminister og satte agendaen for de norske forpliktelsene. Og bakerst der finner dere også de forpliktelsene som Norge inngikk, og som vi skal følge opp. Men det ikke jeg som skal lede dette panelet i dag. Tor-Hugne Olsen bak meg, nettopp. Du som leder da politikk i Norge, og de fleste av dere vet jeg kjenner han. Men skal også lede dette panelet i dag. Så tusen takk for at dere her, og at dere engasjert, fordi det trenger vi. Og så håper jeg at vi også sammen på Stortinget finner sammen de viktigste store sakene. Og da ønsker jeg bare Tor-Hugne velkommen og lykke til.
Tusen takk, Heidi, og tusen takk for innsatsen som leder av SRHR-nettverket på Stortinget de siste 4 årene. Og velkommen til alle dere som stiller opp her, og velkommen til Maren, ny leder. Det blir veldig spennende. Det faktisk første gangen vi har en leder i nettverk som ikke fra Høyre eller Arbeiderpartiet. Så det også en ny opplevelse. I will switch to English. This panel is going to be in English, and it's going to be all about what Heidi has just explained us about the follow-up of the Nairobi conference, which was 25 years after Cairo, the big population development conference in 1994. At that conference, Norway gave some very prominent promises, and arguably actually the highest of promises of any country during that conference, which we were happy about. And what we have in this conference is a little bit, where are we 2 years after? I should of course have started by saying my name is Tor-Hugne Olsen. I'm the Executive Director of Seksuelle. We are the Norwegian member association to International Planned Parenthood Federation. And International Planned Parenthood Federation is the main body internationally that looks at sexual and reproductive health and rights. So we have a panel here today where we have invited some of the main international actors, and I would like to say the main position and opposition actor in the follow-up of these commitments. So we will start with the Minister for Development. She's, I would say, fairly new in her job, and we then will have comments from the chair of the Foreign Affairs Parliament, who is the former Minister of Foreign Affairs. Then we will have the international perspective coming from IPPF, the International Parliamentary Forum by its Director General, Alvaro Bermejo. And then lastly, since it's a parliamentary meeting as well, we have invited the Director of the European Parliamentary Forum for Sexual and Reproductive Rights, Neill Datta. So I will then say a very welcome to Anne Beathe to give us opening remarks around from the government side.
Would you like to stand or?
You can choose yourself actually. Yeah,
stand. I'll do it from. Thank you. Now, is there a mic or do I need a microphone? I suppose I do. No? Is it okay? Everyone's nodding. Perfect. Thank you so much, Neill, Alvaro, Tor-Hugne. Thank you for inviting me, and lovely to see prominent guests to this forum. And I'm so happy to see so many prominent parliamentarians from the Norwegian Parliament here today. That really proves that this is a highly prioritized topic, regardless of political party in Norway, which is a strength. Maren, I didn't know until I just arrived this morning that you were the new leader of the network, which is great news. I'm looking forward to cooperating closely with you. Maren, for those of you who don't know her, she is the youngest ever parliamentarian in Norway, so we're very proud of her. Anyway, this is a very important event. I'm happy that it came up so soon after I took office. I'm very happy to be here because this is a topic that lies close to my heart. It also lies close to the foreign minister's heart, Anne Beathe, and we are working closely on this topic in order to put it high on the agenda. And our new political platform, Hurdalserklæringen, is also explicit on our ambitions in this field. So just to start, let me just underline that the government's approach to development is right-based. Human rights are the foundation on which rely our priorities, and the right to decide over your own body is a fundamental human right. Let me also start by saying that civil society plays an immensely important role in this field. We look forward to my colleague Bjørg and I, this is my deputy, some of you know her already. We are really looking forward to working closely with you as civil society in order to shaping our policies. And I'd also like to underline that on our travels, we will actively seek to meet with LGBT plus communities and other relevant groups as we travel. 2 years have passed since the Nairobi Summit. We celebrated the 25th anniversary and we reaffirmed our commitment to the groundbreaking ICPD program of action. The summit was a big success. And in Nairobi, as you know, Norway committed to remain a global leader, politically and financially. Politically, we are committed to stand firm, defend established norms and universal rights. Financially, we committed to invest approximately 10.4 billion Norwegian crowns in SRHR for the period of 2020 to 2025. This includes approximately 9.6 billion Norwegian crowns to SRHR and 760 million Norwegian crowns to end harmful practices. And this commitment was reinforced at the Generation Equality Forum, is that right?
Yes.
It was called the Generation Equality Forum, yeah. In Paris in July. I was afraid I said something wrong there. Yeah. Where Norway signed up to the Action Coalition on Bodily Autonomy and Sexual and Reproductive Health and Rights. As we know, the COVID-19 pandemic has reversed a lot of progress. Some of the progress made on women's rights and equality, and it has further increased the pressure on SRHR globally. This is a huge challenge. same time as the need of services increased, the access decreased. According to the UN, we have witnessed increased maternal and newborn mortality. We have seen dramatic increases in sexual and gender-based violence, unplanned pregnancies, unsafe abortions, child marriages. So that's the backdrop we're working with. And we know the importance of securing sexual and reproductive health and rights if we are to realize our development goals. And that is also why we have identified a woman's right to decide over her own body as a priority within our efforts to improve women's rights and gender equality internationally. So we will increase our support, we will build new alliances, we will step up the support to family planning, contraceptives and safe abortions. The government will promote and protect freedom and dignity of, in sexuality and for all gender identities. We know that in multilateral negotiations, the attempts to weaken and erode the agreed language on women's rights and gender equality continues with undiminished force. There is a strong need for a pushback against the pushback. It's disturbing that maintaining pressure on established consensus on gender equality and SRHR seems to be an integral part of certain country strategies. Let's put it bluntly. This is a threat against the international human rights framework. Turkey's withdrawal from the Istanbul Convention on Violence Against Women and several other countries' attempts to introduce restrictive abortion laws, LHBT plus free zones, etc., illustrates the seriousness of conservative headwinds that we are facing, even in our own neighborhood. I must say it's frustrating to have spent so much time and resources, I'm looking at my predecessors, to spend that much time and resources on defending an agenda that the world agreed on 25 years ago. But Norway will stand firm. And frustrated or not, the picture isn't entirely bleak. There are some encouraging news, especially after the presidential elections in the US. The US is back at our side of the table. This is great news. Many countries support our position, and we will continue to work to create alliances and move the middle ground. So to sum up our commitments, the right of every girl, every woman to decide what to do with her body, with her life, with her future, and to stand by the minorities that face so many challenges today. Thank you.
Sorry. Okay. If I look at the people at the back, can you hear me clearly?
Yes.
Okay, no, that's good. So we don't need to fiddle with the microphone. Thank you very much to Anne Beathe. That was very clear messages that which means we have a good starting point for this discussion. It would be good to hear from the leader of or the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee, Ine, if you have any particular comments or if this is basically what you did in the previous government. Please go ahead.
Well, thank you so much, Torunn, and thank you to all of you for being here today. And thank you also to Anne Beathe, because I think what you said summed up in a very good way what we have been working with for the past 8 years, actually. And I'm also looking at my excellent colleague, Ine, sitting down there. And he will also, of course, be able to pitch in if there is something that he would also like to focus on. I fully share the analysis that Anne Beathe has on where we stand at the moment with regards to many of the challenging issues we're facing. pushing back the pushback is maybe what we've spent most resources on, and sometimes I feel it almost physically pushing back the pushback. And we could have come so much further if everyone not only abided by the obligations that were made 25 years ago, but also if there were not, I would say, the sense that kind of spread around over the past 4 to 5 years was that it was okay for countries to act like Anne Beathe described. It had no political cost whatsoever. On the contrary, it served as, especially internally in many countries, it serves as a booster politically to the forces that we would like to, I would say, fight, at least all of us in this room. So that was a challenge. What we decided to do, in addition to, as Tor-Hugne said, the very ambitious pledges and promises that were made in Nairobi, we were also very keen on focusing on one other element that is extremely important in this regard, and that is SGBV. We did it with the conference that you attended in Oslo in 2019. We gave a pledge of 1 billion Norwegian kroner over 3 years, which we have fulfilled. What we have seen, though, is exactly as Anne Beathe says, the picture is not entirely good after the COVID pandemic. We see that SGBV is more of a prominent feature in many conflicts and humanitarian situations now, due to both the lack of access, but also what we fought a lot to install in our pledges and our policies. We have to fight impunity. We have to end impunity. As long as there is impunity for sexual and gender-based violence, you will not reach the ultimate goals that you are planning to reach. So it's been, I would say, it's a tough fight in many aspects, because you have to fight both the normative side, you have to push back the pushback, you have to fight for established rights. I said several times, and I think Anne Beathe certainly said it as well, that when I took office as foreign minister, I had no idea, and I don't think Ine had either, any idea that we would be spending much more time trying to avoid erosion of the rights that were already in place. So what we tried to do instead was to also find new areas where we needed progress, and SGBV is one of them. That is also why we have placed, or we did when we campaigned for the Security Council, we set out protection, and especially then protection of women and children and girls in humanitarian situations and conflict situations as one of our priorities in the Security Council. And raising those issues in the Council is actually paramount to make any kind of change. Because unless we can raise this in the most prominent forums and where all the countries are seated who actually can do something about this, we will not reach anywhere. I think it is very, I'm very pleased to hear also when Anne Beathe says that they will continue the work that we started with building new alliances. And in this work, that is extremely important. We saw it, just again to use the SGBV conference as an example, we saw it very clearly when we thought about how to engage more countries in this specific topic. So we set out a strategy where we wanted to have close links and as co-hosts countries where this is an issue. So we had co-hosts from Iraq, the United Arab Emirates, and also from Somalia. In addition to, and I had no idea about this, but it was the first time that the Red Cross movement and the UN movement had a conference together, which I think was quite amazing. We were hoping that that could serve as a good example for the future as well. But to build those new partnerships is extremely important in a world where, yes, we see backsliding in many aspects, but we also see that there are some glimmers of hope in many countries that are turning around from a very conservative, very, I would say, not rights-based approach to this, to actually implementing, for instance, abortion rights that were not there 5 or 10 or even longer ago. We have to embrace those progresses and try to work with these countries, because they can also serve as very good regional examples on how to work. So I'm very pleased to see that the work that we started is continued. I also feel that there is a very broad political consensus about this. I think that is also what is going to continue to give Norway a strong voice in this, to work politically with all the big actors like UNFPA and others, to be engaged and also to engage other countries will be extremely important when we continue to push this agenda. And I'm very hopeful when I look out at this audience. I know that at least here in Parliament, this is not going to be an issue at all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ine. I am now pleased to welcome one of our two international guests. You've now had the chance to listen to I think the main person in the government and the main person in the opposition that will be dealing with this here in Norway. So I'm pleased to welcome Alvaro Bermejo from the International Parenthood Federation. Would you have any messages for them, or what would your thoughts be on the role that Norway can play?
Thanks, Tor-Hugne. Thank you, Minister. Thank you, nice seeing you again. And hello to everybody here. You know, I come from IPPF, as Tor-Hugne has said, the world's largest SRHR federation, providing services in over 140 countries. 7% of the world's safe abortions are provided through our members, and we are the largest non-state provider of contraception in 89 countries. So I'm much more used to, you'll find us in the clinics or on the streets, much less in buildings like this one and in this company. So apologies for being a little bit nervous sort of in reacting to these comments. But I'd like to start just by saying thank you, Norway. Thank you for that cross-party consensus on these issues, which, as you said, in this increasing polarized world is more and more difficult to find. And thank you for making use of that consensus, making good use of it, because we need it more than ever. So I want to thank you for the emphasis in the new government on reproductive services and on CSE, going even beyond the good progress that has been made before. I say it's more important than ever for at least two reasons. One, because we have seen the impact of the COVID pandemic, and you have described it very well in your speech and in your reflections. And two, because, and you have also mentioned it, because we are facing an anti-rights, anti-choice, populist, macho voice that is better organized, better financed, and more aggressive than it has ever been. And I don't say that seeing it in the UN corridors or in the EU corridors, where I know many of you see it. I say that speaking from the clinics, seeing the people gathering in the clinic stores all around the world now to harass women who are coming to get perfectly legal healthcare in many of these clinics, harassing the health providers, waking up to the clinics with graffitis on the wall. That's what the opposition I'm talking about. And in the face of that opposition, we need to remember Nairobi. We need to remember ICPD 25, because there was a broad consensus, a really broad consensus for progressing the Cairo agenda and taking us beyond. And of course, Norway was prominent in that consensus. And we agreed to 12 global commitments, and we made, in addition to the one from Norway, 1,200 national government and non-state actor commitments in Nairobi. Of course, it's difficult to track. And I've created, I have the pleasure of sitting on it, a high-level commission to monitor progress. Its first report is actually coming out on Monday, being issued from New York. The commission was chaired by former President Kikwete from Tanzania and the Right Honorable Jean-Michel, Governor General of Canada. And it's coming out with a title called No Exceptions, No Excuses. And it's strongly situated within the COVID response, as you would imagine, very much looking at what has the COVID response shown us that we didn't know when we made the commitments in Nairobi. And I would argue, and the Commission argues in the report, that the first thing it has taught us is how fragile the R in SRHR is. How easy it has been to roll back gains that we thought we had made and were there to stay. We have seen so many countries using the epidemic as an excuse to roll back sexual and reproductive rights. And I'm not just talking of the usual suspects, I'm talking about many, many countries where we have seen that, and we need to call it out, and the report will call it out. And I also want to say thank you to Norway, not just for the commitment it made and for delivering on it, which I'm sure it has been doing and will do, but for having a meeting like this one, in which we're keeping an eye on progress. We're holding the past government and the current government to account for those commitments. You'll see in the report a recommendation that countries establish national mechanisms to oversee those commitments and that they include them in their national reviews of SDG progress. I would encourage Norway to be an example on that as well. You know, of the things we've talked, you know, there's no doubt we need to invest in services, services meaning contraception, abortion services, SQDV, etc. But we also need to invest in building movements. And we know we need to do more and better on that in order to turn the tide. And as the Commission says, in order to do that, we're going to have to develop new narratives. We need to keep fighting on a rights-based agenda in the UN and in many other normative corridors. But to get the public, that middle ground that you mentioned, Minister, with us, we need to use new narratives, and we need to research them and use those properly. The other issue I'd like to highlight here, which I hope and I know has been part of Norway's push as well, is we saw there were about 80 countries that during the COVID pandemic did not include SR, sexual and reproductive health services, as part of the essential package of services during the pandemic. Nearly 80 countries did not do that. As if pregnancies were not time-bound, as if we could wait till the epidemic was over to deliver a baby or to interrupt an unwanted pregnancy. We need to make it part of the essential package of services that we deliver under universal health care, and we really count on you to push that. We need to understand that there's much bigger investment needed in midwives, and we need to understand the potential for self-managed care and medical abortion. Without it, we will not be able to deliver on the Nairobi commitments. That's where a lot of our investment needs to go. And I've been very glad to hear you talk about how we need to reach further. We need to reach further in humanitarian spaces. The statistics are still appalling. 27 years after Cairo, and we know we cannot meet the global targets on unwanted pregnancies, on SGBV, or on anything else if we do not do better in humanitarian settings. And I keep discussing with my colleagues that talk about feminist foreign policies, that clearly they must not be talking about humanitarian aid as part of their foreign policy, because I still have to see a feminist humanitarian assistance. It is the first time I ever came to Norway was to an oil industry meeting in Stavanger. The last time I came was to discuss SGBV in humanitarian settings. Those are the two most macho environments I've ever come across in my life, the oil industry and the humanitarian setting. And I say that having spent 12 years in the Red Cross as part of the humanitarian response. I speak from within. We've got to change that. If not, we will not meet any of our SRHR commitments, full stop. And finally, I want to also, and humanitarian is one aspect of reaching further. We could talk about young people, and I'm glad that we have a young leader of the APPG here. We've got to do much better with young and married sexually active people around the world, and we need to recognize the diversity of sexual orientation and gender identity in young people and in older people, and reach out much more. Finally, I wanted to finish, coming from the UK, they know I was going to say this, I want to finish on the commitments that donors made, which were financial commitments. Again, we are falling short. And the worst example, the country I come from, the UK, which has just introduced some brutal cuts to aid in general, but to the SRHR budget in particular, that is dramatically going to affect the world's ability to deliver. It is a betrayal of women's trust and of what we stood for in Nairobi. People need to keep reminding them of that. It is not okay. We made promises, we have to keep those promises. So thank you, Norway, for being with us on this and for making us feel that there's such a strong ally in Norway, in the UN, in the EU, with you to what we're trying to do from the clinics and from the schools. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alvaro. I should first of all say thank you for traveling in these difficult times. So it's our first international guest, so we are hoping that this is not proving too risky, so that we will have some more coming up, and even some more from further away than Europe. Usually we've had these conferences before, and we usually brought people from the south as well, which was absolutely impossible this time, of course. But I think that was a good replacement. You brought up the humanitarian situation and the challenges there, which are very important. Also, thank you for bringing our attention to the follow-up committee of the Nairobi promises. We put this one on the tables around, which is an invitation for the launch of the report that Alvaro was referring to. So for those interested, that is actually going to happen on Monday. Then from humanitarian and global, we can turn to what is an increasing challenge for us, and that is that some of these challenges are coming closer. And we see also in countries very near to us that we have these increasing opposition to sexual and reproductive health and rights. So we will turn to Europe in just 1 second. I just, knowing my audience, I try to address abbreviations. So when Alvaro says CSE, that is sexuality education, or comprehensive sexuality education, for those who are wondering about that. And everybody's of course allowed to ask when we say things here that might not be obvious to everybody. I would then like to welcome Neill, who is the director of the European Network of Networks in the Parliament for Sexual and Reproductive Rights. I don't know if that came across correctly, Neill. And we will say something about the challenges that we see also in Europe and the situation near it.
Yeah, thank you, Tor. So I'm from IPPF, the European Parliamentary Forum for Sexual and Reproductive Rights. So first, congratulations on the new chair of the Norwegian APPG. You join a family of 30 similar APPGs across Europe. And I have just a few brief comments. Which are based on a recent experience of ours. EPF, we recently convened a meeting of parliamentarians in Warsaw in late October to commemorate 1 year since the Constitutional Tribunal came up with that decision outlawing abortion for fetal anomaly, which has then been called a de facto ban on abortion. And so we had political leaders from approximately 20 countries there. Upon the invitation of the Polish APPG, which is not so much all-party parliamentary group, it's most political parties, but not from the ruling party, but so we were there upon their invitation, in order to raise awareness and ramp up the political pressure on the situation in Poland. And it was really very interesting. Along with IPPF, we've been part of a weekly briefing with CSOs in Brussels and in Warsaw about the situation in Poland. And over the past year or so, the situation has just been getting worse and worse. We keep hearing about people being persecuted, demonstrations being broken up by the police, violence even, and things like this, and then the degradation of the rule of law. So we knew this intellectually, but it was quite something to be there in Warsaw and to see it in person. So just a few examples. Before the actual event took place, we had a preparatory dinner. So, you know, like us coming from the outside with the local hosts, a bit like we did yesterday with Tor and Alvaro, we just went out for dinner, but there were 20 of us. We realized that at that table with 20 people, there were 5 of us who were all being sued in Polish courts by the organization who was behind the LGBT-free zones and the drafter of the anti-abortion measures. So we need to see that this is taking place at many different levels, and it's really designed to scare people in Polish society and even beyond Poland. Another thing that we saw was also, we heard a briefing about the situation of the Constitutional Tribunal, and then about broader rule of law in Poland. It's quite amazing. We're not talking about just abortion now. We're talking about the erosion of a liberal democracy in Europe in the 21st century. And so I think even notions, I know they're very well intended, but even notions like pushback really underestimate the scale of what we're dealing with at the moment. The same organization which is suing so many people, we learned in September this year, has created an institute for higher learning, and will start getting young people in 18 to 25 and give them master's degrees in family or marriage or things like this. It's meant to be a new Central European university to replace the one that was kicked out of Budapest. And then these people will staff the ministries of Poland, Hungary, and then eventually the EU and other institutions. So I think that's the scale of transformation that we're dealing with here. And then maybe just a final anecdote also. We went to visit one of these famous LGBT-free zones, and I think, Tor, you were there with us. It was quite something. I thought that the LGBT-free zones were the lightest of all the measures. You know, a woman can't get an abortion, that's potentially life-threatening. Putting people in prison for comprehensive sexuality education, that's not good. But LGBT-free zone, that there's nothing specific, etc. We heard the testimony of a young man who comes from one of them, who explained how basically this measure just unleashed the darkest demons of all of their neighbors in this small place. So that it's not necessarily crimes, but living in a daily fear of being pushed like this by someone calling him fat or something like that. And imagine dealing with this on a daily basis, and you realize just how profound these changes can affect society. So I think that's some of the things that I took back from my trip in Poland just a few weeks ago. Now, with that said, I don't want to end on a positive note. I think it's like we all watched an episode of Handmaid's Tale. But maybe what can we do here, okay? And specifically Norway. First, understand the scale of the problem that we're dealing with. So it's more than backlash. We're talking about democracy and rule of law. Secondly, Norway stands in a very unique situation. You have broad cross-party consensus on SRHR. The main difference is the technical details of how do we do this. Okay, but that's something very unique here. I speak at these types of meetings in many countries, and not very often do we have the incoming and outgoing governments at the same table. Without, it's not often that this happens. So that's one thing. Another thing is, based on this broad political consensus, we need stronger, louder voices who speak strategically on certain issues and who don't fall into the trap of now what are states using anti-gender in their geopolitical dynamics. So we need this to happen. SRHR now needs to be a geopolitical issue, and we need to treat it as such. Norway already has limited or conditioned funding on the basis of acceptance of rule of law, and this seems to be something that works. Maybe in your dialogue with other countries, other member states in the EU, this is a lesson that can be shared. Another thing is what Alvaro mentioned is that's the setback in SRHR as a result of COVID and girls not being educated, family planning programs not being implemented, etc. what we're hearing from a number of different countries is the potential that COVID will be used as an excuse to reduce development aid. Okay, we've already heard this from the UK. If we know the UK very well, we know that that's a pretext. It was something in the planning, but we're hearing this from other countries. So money to developing countries could be declining at the same time as we're not providing them with access to vaccines. And so I think this is something that we need to realize. And it would be good for Norway to use its voice to say, no, we can provide more funding, and it's a moral imperative to do so. And then maybe just to conclude by saying that I think in Nairobi we made a great progress forward. We have the broad international consensus, and I think now that we've come out of COVID, or we're coming out of this, I think we can have greater clarity about the scale, about the importance of what it is that we're doing, and also pitch it at the right level, at a political and geopolitical level. And Norway can be, because of your position close to the EU but not inside it, also your financial weight can be a leader in this. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much to Neill, and I think from the front it's interesting to see that when we have panels in Norway, the politicians are women and the activists are men. And I think that proves well for the future. Also, when we had our parliamentary meeting in the new network this morning, there were 3 parties led by men and 3 parties led by men and 3 by women. It was fair enough. Those who came there. I will be looking forward to questions from the floor. So you can just raise your hands or whatever if you have a question or a comment or a challenge or something for the people here in front. And of course, these are people that have a lot of power. Now they agree a lot here as far as I could see. So I will maybe start by a question to Anne Beathe. You mentioned, and it was emphasized also by Ine, that you want to enter into new alliances, and that how important that is for the development of this field when we see the opposition going other places. Can you elaborate a bit on that? Are there areas that or countries or places where you think that new alliances could be built?
Yes, I can elaborate a little bit on that, but I don't want to be too specific. I actually had a meeting with my very good co-workers yesterday. We were discussing the new action plan on gender that we will start working on very, very soon. And we were discussing these new alliances. I was just, and I was telling my co-workers that I had a great meeting with my Nordic counterparts just last week. Where we all agree that we need to step up, we need to use our joint forces. However, in order for this to work, we need to make alliances with the not usual suspects, and we will identify them, we will work with them, and we will sort of. We will lure them to the table. I'm looking at Ine Eriksen now because she's nodding, so I'm on the right track. And I was very inspired what you said with the conference you mentioned, Ine, about what was it? It was Abu Dhabi and no.
It was United Arab Emirates, Somalia.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that's exactly the way we have to move forward in order to achieve progress.
Yes, Tina, you wanted to comment on that.
Yes, because I truly believe that this is really part of the key here, and I'd like to focus a little bit on what you said, Neill, also on the countries that are very close to us, both geographically and that we cooperate with on other issues. What I think we've seen over the past years is that if we only seek partnerships with our like-minded countries, that's very good for ourselves. We can have conferences where we preach to the converted.
We all agree.
Yes, we all agree. But that has proven, I mean, in the past years, it has proven to not be very effective in today's situation, it could be directly counterproductive because we need to engage actors, not only states but also actors that can influence the countries like Poland, Hungary and others in Europe to taking a different course. If it is perceived by those countries that this is sort of either a Western idea or an idea from liberal democracies, which they are trying to fight with all means, it will probably only have the opposite effect of what we want to. So that is why that outreach that you are now planning also in the new strategies is going to be so important. And you mentioned the way that we are using funding. I mean, we are not the biggest fish in this pond, but we are a big enough fish to actually use this with some impact. And what we've done with the LGBTI-free zones, which is a horrible word by the way, is to stop the funding to those municipalities in Poland. It had a very interesting effect, and that's not only because of the Norwegian funding that we stopped it, but it turned out that the EU also, of course, wanted to do more of the same. They've now illustrated this with new mechanisms for holding back funding, for I would say, putting conditionality more at the forefront. And now there are community after community who's rolling back these declarations in Poland. Having said that, I think we also need to pay attention to what you said, that gay people can still live with a lot of fear in these communities, even though the declaration is now formally withdrawn. So we have to keep pushing this, and I think that the EU side also now sees that you have to follow the money in a way. That's the only thing that works. And for many of these countries, it is a lot of money. We did, for instance, with Hungary, we stopped all the funding that the EEA needs to Hungary because we couldn't agree on a fund administrator or the fund for civil society. It has to be independent. And that means that they missed out on 2.8 billion Norwegian kroner, which is a huge amount of money also for Hungary. So I think that's a possibility that we have, but preferably also together with other countries to do this because it has a bigger impact. And I do think that building those alliances that are not only Western and not only with people or countries and actors that agree with us, also trying to use sometimes religious actors who can have an enormous impact in some countries. If they are turned around, that could have an extremely positive impact on the rights of women.
Yes, I'll give the floor to the minister. I'm just looking around the room. I see a lot of NGOs represented in this room, and nobody's. Oh, there we go.
Yes, that was a direct.
Ine, we're reaching each other here.
Yeah.
Because you just gave me a reminder of another perspective. I mean, we can talk about state actors and countries, but there are some other actors out there that are increasingly taking the international scene. I was just reminded of that report from the from Neill's organization called Tip of the Iceberg, which again follows the money and has pinpointed the anti-gender funding internationally, which is really scary reading. And this is, not public money. This is private money from big private donors on anti-gender, not only based in the usual suspects, but also in the midst of Europe. So talking about alliances, we also have to think about those non-state actors, and we need to gang up with like-minded actors in civil society and private sector that can sort of address those forces as well.
Thank you. Then we have Norwegian churches that I saw. I see one more behind, and of course this is your chance now to give good ideas to these politicians or try to change their ways. Okay, thank you.
I'm so sorry, I have to go because I have a meeting in my committee. But I would say thank you for a good meeting, and it was very nice to meet you. I look forward to the work next year.
Thank you. Bye.
Yeah, my name is Hollis Korsla. I'm a senior advisor for health in Norwegian Church, and we are a faith-based organization. but we are working on sexual and reproductive health rights, and we have focused on especially on comprehensive sexuality education and family planning and maternal mortality and the decrease of that. What I see in our work, we have been working with faith leaders for many years, trying to get them on this agenda. And what we were thinking, and I will ask you, what about working on value clarification tools? I think that must be the way forward, because what we see when we are presenting the material to the communities, to health workers, to teachers, there are so many prejudices among the people who are going to do the services to adolescents especially. So I will just ask you, do you have any experience on working on value clarification tools? Is this a way forward when you're talking about new way of working and having new allies in this work? Thank you.
I think maybe that one is a bit to Alvaro as well. So maybe you can start.
Yeah. Thank you, and thanks for that comment. This is what I was referring to when I was talking about the Commission, and certainly we believe that at IPPF as well, is if you want to get new partners, and particularly these partners you're talking about, you need new narratives. You're not going to get them on our existing narratives. You're just not going to. And we need, in order to do that, to meet people where they are, and then work with them to try and get somewhere else. And we haven't done that in the past, I think. I think we haven't done that because we thought, well, we're right. They just have to understand us. And if they don't understand, it's because they're racist and misogynist and they're brainwashed and all of that stuff, right? That was a little bit our approach. And that approach is losing us ground. I've got absolutely convinced. We need to first understand where they are, and that requires actually investing in research, just like the marketing companies do. We need to understand the underlying values that are there, and we're developing some methodologies. We started in Ireland, was the first time we really did that in a systematic way. We knew we wouldn't win that referendum talking about rights or choice. We would not. All the polls showed that. We needed a new narrative there. We needed to understand what it is where people had their values that mattered, those that were not with us. And we need to we've kept doing that since, and we need to keep doing that, and then really work on value clarification. So I would say, yes, we need tools for value clarification, but we also need more research to understand the starting values of these groups in these countries and all of that. And then we've done plenty of methodology. I know many other organizations have as well, and I'm sure we can share and learn. But I would highlight that need to also invest in that research. We find it hard when we tell our donors that that's what we want to spend some of the money on, and they look at us like, what you're talking about. Even though they're used to doing it, for their own political parties here and for many other things, but the idea that you would do that before working on SRHR sort of in other countries, people say, no, we're not doing that. We have to, and we have to do it if we want to work in Poland with some of these actors, if we want to work in all these places, not just in Iraq or in Somalia, but there as well. And I would encourage us to try and meet people where they are, and then understand their values, why they are listening to these macho politicians who are attacking women's bodies, and try and move them from there. So thank you for that.
Thank you. That's applause. I see IOM, and I'm happy if people do exactly like all this, that they say their names, because I'm not sure that I will remember all the names. So yes.
I think I ought to stand because I don't project my voice so well. I'm Homa Hassan from IOM Norway, the UN Migration Agency. And normally at these sorts of meetings, I excuse myself for posing a question in English, so So I'm very glad for the panellists here to be my alibi. Thank you for that. And also I'm a bit nervous because my heroes are on the panel too. I just wanted to make a comment when we're talking about it's like eating an elephant and taking small bites. So there are many, many different considerations. And I was wondering if we could also talk or consider remittances, because those are 4 times the size of developmental aid in a time now where developmental aid is being reduced and eroded. And we can perhaps find ways, especially IOM, we're working a lot with this, with the transnational financial corridors and working with governments for whom, for many countries, nation states, they are a lifeline. So perhaps we could have workshops, thematic workshops, brainstorming, where we can also look at Norway's commitment for SDG 10C and reduce the cost of remittances as a carrot and stick approach, and also maybe to divert or formalize into programs where remittances can be used for essential SRHR services as well. So it was just a thought to throw in there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I see some nodding. Yeah, you want
We
to
take
say?
notes. Thank you. It's interesting.
Yes, I think that's a good sign of agreement. I also had one by the wall, and I'm not sure which organization.
Yes, yeah, I can introduce myself. My name is Silje Ragland, and we work for Plan International. And thank you for inviting us here today. This is really interesting, and I will also thank Sex and Politics for producing this leaflet on an overview of where the funds are going and who is or do we reach the goals that we have set. My question is actually to the minister here, Anne Beathe Tvinnereim, and the MPs present. As we have seen in this in the leaflet here, there is a weak canalization of the money to civil society. And civil society organizations actually get 16% of the global funds to SRHR. And as we know, Olsen is not here right now, but what he mentioned earlier this year is that actually when COVID hit, civil society organizations were the ones that were back there doing the work on the ground. And he regretted not to have granted more funds to civil society organizations because they needed the funds to do the work that they could do while everyone left the countries. So now we're in a budget discussion again with the Parliament, and it's soon up for a vote. And the new government has presented their amendments to the first draft. My question is for you, Anne, about what can we expect in terms of fund allocations to a civil society? Because Plan International is very fond of civil society getting much more funding to do the work that they do on the ground. And what we've seen in the drafts that you presented, you haven't reached the expectations that we thought, to say politely. So we would actually invite ourselves to a discussion on how that can be improved in the coming years. And the question is, what do you foresee in the next 4 years? Thank you.
Thank you, Anne Beathe. Go ahead. Respond.
Yes, well, for our international guests, we just 2 days ago, the new government presented the new budget proposal, which is basically a soft amendment of the previous government's proposal. So it's really next year that we will see sort of the new government's priorities. Let me first say that SRHR will be prioritized very, very much in upcoming higher on the agenda, also financially. In terms of channels, I can give you any numbers. I'm very not only on SRHR, but on several thematic issues. I have always been very clear on civil society's ability to reach the grassroots level, and that is a point I've always been outspoken on, and I still very much mean that. So you will have be a very important channel, along with other channels, in our future proposals. But what I would like to remind you of is that we have an invitation next week. Next week, isn't it? Yeah. But in a few days, we have invited the Norwegian civil society to a very open discussion on SRHR. How can we work together, both on delivery and policy? So I welcome the discussion also on funding priorities. So we'll continue the discussion next week, or in 2 weeks. I think it's next week. It's soon.
Thank you very much. I think we're coming to a close. Did I see one more? Yes. Last one here. Yes, please.
Yes. Hi, my name is Ine. I'm from Global. I'm really happy to have heard that both faith-based organizations and religious leaders have been highlighted in kind of when we are challenging established norms and creating new narratives. And I just also want to comment on the importance of including young people in that, because young people influence other young people. So if we want to create those new narratives and have young people on board, then civil society organizations that work directly with both young people and religious leaders on the grassroots are extremely important in reaching those goals. So I just wanted to highlight that we can't forget the young ones and the adolescents.
Thank you. Yes, in case you didn't understand that was the YWCA.
Yes.
YWCM, why?
YMCA, YWCA.
That's it, thank you.
Another abbreviation in this race.
It's a long one.
It is.
Thank you. And I
maybe I can do it this way, that actually we make this sort of the final round from the panel. I just see that the time is about to run out, so it will be your final comment. So if you have other comments, you add them as well.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for reminding me that we had forced everybody into speaking English. So let me also thank you to those of you who had had to switch to English. But I just wanted to come back on this issue of civil society and in particular young people. One, on civil society, to remind us the key role we played in Cairo already, and part of the success of Cairo was that for the first time civil society was there en masse and with a coordinated strategy. And we've played since in this field. And I say this now particularly because I know I've been following very closely all the Afghanistan discussions and debates that are taking place. And my sense is civil society is being forgotten as if it didn't exist in Afghanistan, and as if women hadn't proven that they can continue providing health and education to other women there if you just support them. And I'd like to put that as a reminder. I know that it is a discussion where Norway is playing an important part as well. So I would encourage you to find ways to get there, as the former health systems and education systems are sort of failing women and girls there. The second issue I wanted to finish on a positive was when we think that we are living in the era of macho politics, which is how I define it, where it brings political credit and in many places, in at least half the countries of the world, to attack women's bodies and women's rights, because it shows that you're strong, that you're sort of anyway. In that environment where we are having to defend, we're also seeing gains. And in SRHR, in most of those countries, the gains are led by young feminist movements on the streets. So it's not just that they're rich and other young people, it's that they are changing societies. Think Argentina, think Mexico, think many places. And they're doing it, let me say it bluntly, without any donor support, with zero donor support in most cases. We need to change that. We need to understand that in the new geopolitical landscape, these young feminist movements are key for the change that we want to see. Let's see how we learn how to support them without taking them over. I'll finish on that because I think it is a really positive note of the current situation that's with them.
I think that's good, and if we have positive notes, maybe that is challenging in the European context. But Neill, do you have some final remarks for us?
Yeah, I'll say something, I'll try to advance something positive. First, in terms of these anti-gender movements or this pushback, whatever, Alvaro's mentioned, the idea of needing to reframe developing new narratives. I would also suggest that there's one area that we have often overlooked, which I suggest maybe we need to take a look at, and that is devising proactive strategies to get these actors out of decision-making spaces. We know that there's certain organizations, they're submitting briefs to the European Court of Human Rights, they're there at the UN. We're letting them get away with this. Maybe we need to have a strategy to get them kicked out because they don't respect basic human rights and democratic values, the UN Charter, the Council of Europe, European values. That's one thing. Second point is, so that's on the to-do list. Second point is more positive, and that is with all of the pushback that we've been seeing, equally what we've been seeing is that this has been lighting up the fire among many people who are much more proactive and politically engaged on sexual reproductive health and rights and women's rights more broadly, or progressive issues. So I think that's something we haven't seen before. In the European Parliament, there is a level of awareness on sexual reproductive health and rights that has never existed in 20 years that I've been working there. So I think the pushback is also generating a huge amount of understanding and support for these issues, because now we realize that they're not just given, we have to fight for them. And so I think we need to channel that energy.
Thank you, Neill. I'll go to my side woman here, Ine, for final remarks. Maybe also in the context of our international guests highlight the Norwegian role in having no real opposition to these rights. Doesn't that mean that we should have more of a champion role, and maybe a champion role with some of the controversial rights that are there, like abortion, like LGBTI rights, sexuality, education?
Well, I think that you have one of these champion roles on many of these aspects, and it's not only a funding issue, it's also a political engagement issue, and the willingness to take on countries and actors who are not necessarily moving in the right direction. And I mean, our government did so also with European countries close to us, as I just mentioned, but also in the wider development policies. I think there has been many wise comments and good questions, and I think the panel has delivered a very good description on not only the situation as it is today, but also where we can move in order to push the agenda in the right direction. I would just like to add one thing that I think is important when we talk about SRHR and we talk about women's rights. We have to engage men, and I think that's an extremely important point to not be overlooked. It's very easy for us to think that this should also be carried by women, that women are in a way responsible for women's rights. I think that's a false way of thinking. Men are equally responsible for women's rights, and if they are not engaged in this agenda, we will not see a long-term change, because this starts with small boys and how they are raised, what they are taught in school, what environment they grow up in, what they pass on to their daughters and their grandchildren. So unless we also crack the code of engaging men constructively in this agenda, I think we will have an even bigger challenge in changing the narrative as we talked about.
Thank you very much. I think that is some work that has started well in many places, and also with your initiative during the previous government. Let us hear if that is something that will also be carried to the present government, as well as we heard you discussing on TV the other night around, are we on track with these goals? Our report says we're not quite there, and we heard you saying that you will be committed to the goals. It means that you will also be committed to the gap.
Yes. Yes, I can make it very easy and quick statement of that. We are not on track. We will be on track. This is a high priority for the new government. You know, I was what, 22 when the ICPD Egypt took place. I would never have imagined, you know, at that time that we would, 25 years ahead, we would be sitting here discussing these issues. I believe that Norway has we are in a position where we can speak where others don't, and we have the cross-political common agenda. You know, I cannot do everything that Ine and Mr. Olsen is saying. That's an extremely good starting point, and we have committed not only through the new government's political declaration, but also in the budget proposal that we will take on a global leadership role on this. And it has not only to do with finance; it's also the political agenda. So we are deeply committed to that. I think this has been a very interesting session. I've learned a lot, and I've made a few notes on some of the takebacks. Louder voices in terms of this also being an element in a geopolitical discussion and an attack, the bigger picture of the attack of the liberal democracies also on our own continent. It has to be seen in the bigger picture. So this is not only our limited agenda. This is the big geopolitical agenda, and I'm taking that back with me. To stand firm on these topics as part of the universal healthcare agenda. You know, never use COVID-19 as an excuse to sort of undermine the universality. Is that the right word? Yeah, universality. And what you said about the new narratives. We simply have to understand and address the underlying values as well, and that's a point to us as donors as well, so thank you for that. So on that note, I'm looking forward to continue very close dialogue with the this parliamentary group and civil society, and to keep up the good work that we're all doing. Thank you.
Thank you. That was a very good closing remarks. I have some small bags behind here for the guests, the panelists before you leave. And thank you all for coming. I think this was a good session, even though most people agree. I think we highlighted why it is important still, even if it's not a highly controversial issue. So thank you very much for coming, and I promise you we will arrange more of these things again.